Hi, everyone, and welcome to Resource Revolution, the resource management podcast. I'm your host, Christine Robinson, and on this podcast, we will discuss the real-life experiences of people in and around the world of resource management. Today, we have Jen Huntington joining us. Jen is the Chief Operating Officer of Kroll, a leading independent provider of risk and financial advisory solutions. Jen has 20 years of experience in operations and services leadership. She brings a wealth of expertise from both the technology and professional services industries. Prior to Kroll, she was responsible for leading global operations for Amazon Web Services, professional services. And Jen has also held strategy, transformation, and operational leadership roles at Genpact, Infor, and SAP. Jen, it is great to have you with us today. Thank you so very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
I am so excited about this discussion that we're going to have. We have already had a number of really exciting and interesting dialogues as part of our episodes, and I've been really interested in sharing a different perspective with our listeners, in particular around not only someone that has had true resource management experience, but also has worked within the world of resource management in a bit of a different capacity. So to give a little bit of background for listeners, Jen and I actually met a couple of years ago at the Resource Management Symposium that's put on by the RMI. So Jen, can you provide us with a little bit of background? What were you doing at that conference in the first place? How did you start to get involved in this space?
Yeah, I looked through my career. So no matter if I was at Genpact, Infor, SAP, or even in my current capacity, I've always had as a part of my responsibility the resource management function. And what I would say is largely resource management is kind of like an underserved an under-acknowledged role in business. I think a lot of people don't think about resource management as a profession. I also don't think that a lot of companies understand how to effectively manage their resources. And I've always really looked to connecting with other like-minded individuals. And that's where I got through the community of the RMI, being able to meet and connect with other resource management professionals and how we can work together to elevate the importance of what this function plays within a company.
I love that. And it resonates so deeply with my own personal mission of elevating the profession of resource management. I could not agree more that RMs are very much not in the forefront where I believe that they should be, and having a seat at the table where resource management truly can be a strategic partner to the business. So it's interesting then from an operational standpoint, did you seek to begin resource management and really to be the catalyst for RM within your organizations? Was that something that happened naturally? How did that manifest itself within your career?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I look at different resource management functions, there's definitely a maturity curve around the maturity of capability in resource management. There's also a variability around who typically owns resource management. It sometimes can be in the business, sometimes it can be in the HR function, and sometimes it can be in the business operating function. And I would say largely it's fallen into my purview, which I've fallen more in the business operations function. So I think it can sit in different places, and then depending on where it sits, it can actually have a different level of impact in the business. I fundamentally believe if your corporation is trying to look to optimize the power of resource management to drive profitability or differentiated customer experience, centralizing it and putting it into the operating function is the way to go. If it sits in the business function, typically it is driven to be, it typically doesn't have the same level of centralization to drive broader scale and impact across the company. So I think it's one of those things that, I mean, largely the resource management community doesn't have a lot of influence on where the function sits. But there's a value of evaluating where it sits and having that conversation within the C-suite.
Agreed. It's very intriguing to me, this dialogue around where resource management sits and the influence and impact that then has on what RM are able to produce independently, but then also as a whole for the organization. In particular, I'm curious your opinion on when you say drive these results from even just a truly practical standpoint, does it really work? Have you seen it work? Is this something that actually brings profitability and increases profitability? I'd like to get your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, 120%. I would say that and when we talk about elevating resource management, I want the resource management community to really start thinking about the value that you bring across three different dimensions. So, dimension number one is a differentiated customer experience. Dimension two is how do you drive improved profitability? And dimension number three is how do you drive a differentiated employee experience? And all three of them provide bottom line value for a company. So let's start talking about first the customer experience. Customers want to have the best resource that has the aligned skill set that can meet the needs that they're looking for. If they don't find that, the retention rate and the renewal rates associated in that value of that experience of that customer has a direct effect on the bottom line. If they're not willing to renew a contract because they didn't have a good experience, that hits the bottom line. Second is around the profitability of the business. And this is probably where traditionally resource management has had probably the most influence. If you talk about utilization, making sure that you have the right resource at the right time with the right skill set in the right geography, if you do not optimize that mix, you will have a direct impact on both revenue and profitability of the business. And then the last piece, which I think is an emerging trend that I've seen in the last couple of years, is the impact around employee experience. And I think we saw this even more during the pandemic, where specifically in technology industry and in professional services, like the resource retention and was a huge topic. And the reality of it is employees actually got during the height of the pandemic an opportunity to move to different companies because their skills were in high demand. Now we've seen the flip return in the last couple of years, especially in 2023 with the economic decline and the pressure around interest rates in the stock market. So I think workers haven't had as much as an opportunity, specifically in the technology and the professional services. But what I want people to know is it changes. You can go through peaks like we did during COVID. You can go through valleys like we are right now. But at the end of the day, it's about keeping the employees interested in their career and working on projects that excite them. And if you can align the customer's need with the ability to optimize profitability and utilization within the company with what the employee is passionate about, getting that mixture or that trifecta together, you will not only improve your employee experience, you'll reduce attrition, which anytime you have to replace a resource, it costs more money to go in the marketplace. You'll have better impact on the bottom line of the business, and then you're going to be driving better customer experience. And that ultimately is the purpose of resource management.
So well said. Thank you for that. I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. I think that's exactly the perfect bottled up explanation of the power that resource management has and really the ability that RMs have to be a strategic partner to the business. So that leads me then to my next question, which is, have you found yourself having to convince others of this? Because you said that rather effortlessly, right? You know this, and it strikes me as something you just know to be true as fact. So is that because you have had it rolled out for you and it's ready to go? Everyone is just can't wait to implement resource management. Have you had to sell that internally? What has that been like?
No, you absolutely have to sell it internally. So I think it's looking at what is the modern day value around resource management, and you absolutely have to sell the business case to take this to the C-level executive team. And I think your business case is grounded on three pillars: customer experience, building better profitability and revenue, and then ultimately employee experience as well. And you do need to identify what that business case is and start having that dialogue with your executive team. and linking that back to, quite frankly, the investments that are required in resource management. So nowadays, resource management cannot be effectively done unless you have technology to support you. And what I've noticed is a lot of companies have a failure to invest in the technology. So what my advice and recommendation to do would be is when you're building this business case and taking it to your C-suite, you talk about the value and the benefit of resource management that can have aligned to those three pillars. But then you also need to talk about it in the context of the investment that you need to have in technology or digitizing that end-to-end talent supply chain. And I want to maybe take a moment and take a step. I just said supply chain. So I want the resource management organizations to start thinking about how do we talk about the talent supply chain in the context of that in resource management? Because when you start talking about it in the talent supply chain, it starts then putting it into the context of the complexity and the role that resource management plays to integrate all the different functions to ensure that you actually have the talent at the right place at the right time, at the right cost structure, in the right location.
Tell us more about that. So when I will say that when I first heard you give your perspective on this specific concept of the talent supply chain, it unlocked a new part of my brain that hadn't been used before. Tell us more about that. What does that mean? What is the talent supply chain?
So when I use the word supply chain, immediately the two things I want you to start thinking about is demand and supply. And I think as a resource manager, you're going to immediately key into it. So what is demand? Demand is typically what's coming through in evidence in your CRM or your customer relationship management tool that says, okay, we have needs coming in around this particular skill set. And I want to let you know is like, so let's say that you're in a professional services business, you typically have demand that's coming in that's typically listed in a Salesforce application to say, hey, I've got this future demand coming around projects. Now, you could actually apply resource management to internal IT. So you could have demand for internal IT projects that might come from something other than a CRM tool. You could actually use this in a variety of other different ways. But I want you to start thinking about there's demand signals that are coming in that you actually have to do a great job of capturing and getting accuracy of those demand signals coming in. The other part of supply chain is supply. So think of supply in the terms of typically in resource management, it's our resources. If you were in manufacturing, it could be your supply would be products and goods, right, to make a particular product. Typically, resource management is allocated to a professional services business, and our supply is people. But all of our people have different attributes associated with them. They're located in different places, they have different cost structures, but most importantly, they have different skills. So when I talk about talent supply, it's aligning demand and supply. So the second component around the talent supply chain I want you to think about is diving into a little bit more of the supply side. So in the modern day, resource managers need to think about supply can come from multiple places. So supply can be the resources that you have on hand today. So these are your existing employees. Supply can also come from what you want to go to market to hire. So these are your future employees. So this is really what you would do to be working with HR and the recruiting organization to say, hey, we need to go hire 100 new people to do this particular skills. The third part of it is going to be working with third-party contractors. So your partnerships, so that you might want to borrow it. So I want you to think about the ecosystem in the context of what do I need to buy? What do I need to potentially borrow? So that's through your partnerships. But I also want you to start thinking about what I need to build. We are seeing the evolution of skills change at a dramatic pace. So I think it's a half-life or the shelf life of a skill is less than 5 years today. So, and it's every time you go to market to procure new talent, it's going to cost you more. So another key element of resource management nowadays is to look at the talent that you have today and how you can actually start growing that capability. So building, so linking the existing workforce into, okay, what skills am I going to need in 12, 18, 24 months, and be working with them to build those new capabilities in your workforce. At the center of managing all of that is the resource management function.
Could not agree more. And thank you for that, because that really encapsulates the power of resource management if harnessed correctly. And that's really the key component there, right? There's so much more to it than schedules or staffing. There is a effect that has a tail on it that really can be leveraged in a really significant way within the organization. And I guess I'm curious then, from your perspective, in your experience, you talked about the demand signals and how that then, what does that mean? What does that do? Have you seen this in reality take effect? In other words, you've gotten this demand signal, you've been able to harness that data and actually make decisions off of that information. And did they turn out to be the right decisions?
Yes, so let's talk about demand signals, because this is a hotly debated topic. And quite frankly, resource management is only going to be as effective and as good as it is about anticipating the demand signals. And what I would say is what happened during COVID and then followed by the economic crisis in 2023, what we realized is a lot of people's forecasting mechanisms were not capable at changing massive shifts in demand signals.
Yeah.
And then I would argue there's probably a population of resource managers on this call right now going, hey, I never even had signals to begin with, so it's not like I even missed it.
Right.
And I don't want anybody to be thinking that like a lot of companies struggle with that. And maybe we can talk about it in a minute around what you can do to put some of the basic demand signals in.
Absolutely.
What I would say is that the role of what resource management can do about improving better demand signals. If you are more of like the basic end, which a lot of companies out there are, it's about putting together a dedicated process and governance inspection in tight cooperation with the business to review and inspect your demand signals. Typically, demand signals are captured through a CRM system. Typically, it's Salesforce. There are other capable CRM systems that are out there. But I want you to start thinking about what you are doing to review that demand, what frequency, and how you're doing that in partnership with the business entity that's accountable for forecasting or giving you those demand signals. It's typically somebody in the sales organization. And how you actually work with the sales organization to strengthen the quality and consistency of that demand signal. And there's a whole host of things that you tactically can do to actually start doing that. Now, go on to the other extreme. With the advent of technology, machine learning, algorithms, quite frankly, you can leverage and use machine learning to predict what your demand signals are looking like. And this is something that I specifically have done in some of my experiences at AWS, as well as the work that I had done at Genpact, where you actually start building a machine learning algorithm that looks at not only historical data coming from your CRM system, but also starts looking at third-party markers, looking at interest rates, looking at LIBOR rates, looking at third-party data to blend the two together so that you can actually start getting better, accurate demand forecasting signals so that we can prevent what a lot of companies experienced during COVID as well as the economic crisis, where they just missed that signal. And what I would say is that you typically need to look at not only the machine learning algorithm and the third-party data points, but look at it in context to your actual demand signals that are coming from the CRM system. You want to actually have multiple different models or demand signals. And this is where human judgment or the resource manager comes into play. Right. It's looking at both of those, or in some cases, at my time at AWS, we had 4 different models going at the same time. But it was actually on a regular cadence, looking at those different models, seeing the deltas and the determination, and then applying human judgment based on the expertise coming from the resource management community, working with business leadership to say, okay, based on this, this is where we're going to make our bets. And our bets are either going to be that we need to go to market to hire. It's, hey, we need to reskill and retool or build this capability. Or, hey, we're not sure exactly what's going to happen. So therefore, let's go down the partnership ranks or the partnership route, because we believe that is going to give us the safest angle, because we'll see how the demand matures over the next 6 months.
Amazing. I feel smarter just from having heard all of that. And that is a really exciting perspective on not only what is happening today, but really what can happen and what resource managers have to look forward to in the future. But it brings me to the point that I'm wondering about, in order to even get to that level, the buy-in has to be there. So going back to one of the first things that you said, you described getting the investment in resource management and really selling resource management internally. That seems 100% necessary in order to move resource managers from this administrative, scheduling, very tactical function to that elevated level that they'll be able to operate at that level that you just described. And so tell us about that. How are you going about getting that investment? How are you securing buy-in, and what can resource managers do to start there? And is that the first place to start?
Yeah, I call it the big shift from an administrative function to a revenue generating function. So I want all resource managers to think about, you are here to support generating revenue for your business. And if anybody starts referring to you as an admin function, stop them right then and there. You want to start shifting the perception that you are a revenue generating function. And to do that, you're going to need to level up on your business knowledge and your business expertise. We know that most resource managers, they know the resources, they know the skills, they know the capability. You need to start talking as a business leader. And that's the number one thing I think, Christine, I see the shift, and companies that have really started to make that shift, they're leveling up the resource management capability to start talking in dollars and cents. And what I mean is, yes, skill sets are important, but start talking about how these resources are going to enable revenue. And I'll give you a little tip, and hopefully this resonates with your audience. When we started to talk about demand signals, every resource manager out there starts talking about the number of resource requests that they don't have enough information about to be able to appropriately staff it. So you can go out there and you can talk about, hey, I've got 200 resource requests that I'm missing X amount of data on it. So therefore, I can't staff it because I don't know enough about the resource request to identify the resources to staff against it. Common problem everybody thinks about. I want you to start thinking about it and talking about it in a different way. And this is what I mean being revenue generating, leveling up the conversation to business. I want you to start talking about how much revenue you have at risk in the business. So instead of talking about the 200 resource requests that you don't have good enough data quality about, I want you to talk about the $20 million that you have revenue at risk because you don't have the right level of information to generate the resource requests. And that subtle difference goes from being an administrative function to being a revenue generating function.
Amazing. That is phenomenally accurate and really puts into context the elevation that we're talking about in terms of resource managers and what they're bringing to the table and how they can better articulate themselves to position themselves and their function and their entire department really as a strategic partner to the business and really an advisor to leadership within their organizations. Tell us more about getting that investment, right? So getting the buy-in, getting the support in the first place in order to make an investment. So, because there are many things within the resource management space that we need to invest in. It's people, it's resource managers, it's educating them, it's technology, right? So have you found that to be challenging? What can you tell us about getting that buy-in in the first place?
Yeah, it definitely is challenging because what I would say is, and this is honestly one of the reasons why resource management so much is because it's at the center of an organization. By nature, it's an integrator because you have to work across finance, you have to work across business operations, you have to work across HR, and you have to work across the line of business. And what I notice is a lot of this is like on a side note, is a lot of resource managers, these are natural integrators that can easily work across those hybrids. But that's also why it's hard to get the buy-in and to get the business because you typically have to get the CHRO to buy in.
Yes.
You have to get the COO to buy in. You've got to get the line of business to buy in. You have to get even the chief revenue officer to buy in because they're the ones that typically own getting you the right demand signals. And you have to get everybody together. So the way that you do it is you have to talk about it in the language, a common language that they all know. They all know revenue. They all know cost of labor as the two core capabilities. So you have to start talking about instead of like, we'll go back to that example, instead of like X number of resource requests, right? Imagine if you could go to them and say, look, everybody, I look at the demand that we have coming towards us. And based on that demand, either one of two things, you don't have enough capacity to support it, or you are over capacitized to support it. But don't use those words. Talk about it in the language that they know. Based on the demand that you're seeing, you're going to have X amount of capacity that is going to be available. And then you can talk about the cost associated of that idle capacity and how much that's going to cost the business. Or you could talk about, I have X amount of demand coming, and I don't have the ability or the line of sight to fulfill this much demand. So you have X amount of revenue at risk. And you need to start talking about it in those contexts. And then you get them hooked on it. The thing I want you guys to think about is how often do you sit down with your C-suite and talk to them and do 6 months out, 12 months out, in the utopia, which is even 18 months out, where you think you either have gaps in overcapacity or undercapacity in that projection. And sit down and have a strategic discussion with that C-suite to say, when and how are we going to fill that?
That is so helpful, not just in terms of painting the picture of what these conversations can look and feel like, but really with giving RMs a bit of a direction. So many resource managers are either lacking that or find themselves as somewhat lone wolves within their organization. And I think it really goes back, Jen, to what you said at the start of where resource management sits, even within their firm, within their company, because those expectations and therefore what resource management is able to produce are so tightly wound up in one another that having the dialogue with these strategic leaders at the C-suite can become not something that's available to them. And even if it were, they're not really in the position where they have the data or, quite frankly, the insights to be able to have a perspective on some of those things. And so that is something that is so helpful. And I think that resource managers really need to, as a takeaway from this, start asking themselves those questions, right? What is my point of view around some of these major trends that are happening within the business? Do I understand the strategy? What's our growth strategy? At what pace do we want to grow? And when and where? What does that look like? So they can start to use the data that they have access to, because really resource managers have access to so much information and really have a unique perspective into the operations of the business. And so you could probably tell I'm passionate about that. And I think it's really exciting to hear that some organizations are now embracing what that could look like. I have to stop here and ask you then to share about what about the other piece, right? So the other piece is, now that you've secured the investment and the buy-in in order to make these certain investments, The rollout is where I have seen in my experience some of this fall down in and this is industry agnostic at this point. We could be talking about almost anything. But within the resource management space, it is not easy. It is challenging to put the change management into place that is necessary in order to scale an RM function. And I think it really goes back, Jen, to what you said. It touches so many different parts of the organization. And so you presented something a couple of years ago, and I sat in your session around some amazing things that you did around really rolling out resource management, the implementation. Can you give us a taste of that? Because this is exciting, you guys. This changed my life when I heard this.
I would start off with really the 5 areas that I would focus on in driving adoption around a new approach to resource management. Number 1 is you always have to lead with the why. Why are we doing this? And it goes back to the 3 pillars of the why. It's we want to make customers successful. We want to improve the profitability and the revenue growth of our company. And 3 is we also put our employees at the center of everything we do, and we want to help them reach their hopes and dreams. You have to lead with the why. As we talked about, there's a variety of different stakeholders. You need to have our sellers to put in the forecasting in there. You have to have the supply side, our employees put in their skills. You have to have the business leaders to adopt. If you lead with the why and you tailor the why message to each and every person that needs to come across the ecosystem to make the supply chain successful. 2 is I want you to think about the power of branding. And I will take something that we borrowed at Gempact. We branded our resource management function Talent Match. At the center, and why we came up with something as simple as the wording around Talent Match, it was matching our customers with our employees that are passionate about the things that they do so that we can drive where we have opportunity within the business. And we talked about Talent Match and the branding behind it. And we stopped talking about it as a resource management function. We talked about it in the context of ultimately what we were trying to do, which was matching talent with where we had demand. So think about the power of branding, the imagery that you use, the logos that you use, and how you connect that to make it almost like a revolution within the business. Third thing, data, right? If you any change management function shifted away from an individual's goal or a person's initiative that they're trying to drive and make the business at the center of why you're driving that change. And the way that you depersonalize it and make it less, Christine, about you, less about me, and make it about the business impact is by talking about it using data. So always use data to lead where you are and be very transparent about where you are in the transformation. The 4th thing is about governance and consistency. You need to have regular cadences, regular governance. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a 12 to 24 month journey, and you have to, every week you do your demand signal review call. Every week you do your supply skill set assessment call, and you have to have a structured governance and consistency to doing it. And then the last thing I want you to think about is celebrating wins. So, and this kind of ties back to the whole branding, but go showcase that employee that got to be working on a new project that's aligned to their passion.
Yes.
Go talk about the customer that just went to work with Joe Smith and how Joe Smith was able to solve the problem with them, and really celebrate it. Celebrate the fact that you've improved forecasting accuracy and really recognize the sellers and how they've improved it. So I think you need to plan for and create wins, and then you need to shout about it and talk about it in context across the entire company.
Incredible. That is when I say that changed my life. It changed my life. Anyone in the resource management space, if you didn't just get chills hearing that, it's I don't believe you, because it's too exciting. It's very rare, especially these days, to hear something that is a truly unique perspective. And we talk about change management, we talk about getting buy-in or the lack of buy-in, and we don't really talk a lot about how to change that in a way that actually works and a way that is practical that you can actually implement within your organization. So it really, the branding piece is a very exciting concept that, to be honest, RMs can and should be implementing not only in the kickoff phase, but over the course of time as they're working within this space and as they're continuing to, ideally and hopefully, they're delivering on the promises that they're making to leadership and to their people around how to keep them engaged and how to attract talent to the organization and how to drive profitability. So I don't know what I could say that could possibly follow that. Jen, thank you so much. It has been awesome talking with you. So appreciate you coming on and sharing these amazing insights with us. And with that, we will wrap up our conversation. Thank you all for tuning in, and please be sure to subscribe to hear more of our episodes.